I have filed exactly 231 incident reports in my career as a Vethery Field Commander. 230 of them concern things I understood. The last one, the one I am writing now, from a medical bay that smells like antiseptic and something I cannot name, with my left auxiliary limb wrapped in borrowed bandaging because the human medic ran out of her own, that one I am still trying to explain to my superiors. They keep asking the same question. Why didn't you stop him? I keep giving the same answer. You weren't there. What I can't say without sounding like I've lost processor function, is that stopping him never felt like an option. Not once. Not even at the end, when he was bleeding from 4 separate wounds, running on stimulants and, spite, laughing at something only he found funny. I questioned his injuries. Twice. The first time, he said, I've had worse. The second time, he just looked at me. I didn't ask a third time. This is the report of what happened on Sector Veth 9 during the 72 hours that Command will officially classify as a tactical anomaly. I am going to tell you what it actually was. The human arrived at 4:17 and I timestamped it because that is what I do. I timestamp everything. My unit finds it neurotic. I find it the only reliable evidence that time is, in fact, still passing, which on a forward post with no natural light cycle and recycled air that smells vaguely of cooked wire is not something you can take for granted. I also timestamp it because I'd been expecting him for 6 hours. His transport had been diverted. Then, lost. Then, found, which is a word that carries a great deal of optimism when what you mean is recovered from a debris field with 1 working thruster and 2 surviving crew members. He was one of the 2. I did not know this yet. What I knew, at 4 hours 17 minutes and 2 seconds, was that a human male in a standard issue field jacket was walking through my checkpoint with a limp so thoroughly normalized that he'd stopped compensating for it. His gait was, I am not using this word loosely, efficient. Not the efficiency of something that doesn't hurt. The efficiency of something that has decided pain is not relevant information. My secondary officer, Vel, leaned toward me. He's favoring his left side, she said. I see that. Should we log it? We'll ask later. I timestamped, 4 hours 17 minutes and 9 seconds, human operative, visible gait abnormality, left lateral. Declined to report. Assess when trust is established. In retrospect, I find it mildly embarrassing that I wrote when trust is established as though that was something I was going to engineer over a cup of something warm and a frank discussion of feelings. I was still operating under the assumption that a human soldier on a joint assignment brief was roughly equivalent to a Vethery soldier on a joint assignment brief. I corrected this assumption over the next 72 hours. His name was Brennan. Just Brennan, he offered the surname once, in a context I'll get to, and then, never again, so for the purposes of this log he remains mononymic and slightly mythological, which suits him. He was here to help us extract a signal relay from the lower processing tunnels beneath Outpost Veth 9. The Keldrath had seized the outpost 3 weeks prior. We had taken it back. What we had not yet retrieved was the relay itself, because the lower tunnels were, the technical term in my report is, structurally compromised. What I told Brennan, at 4 hours and 31 minutes while he ate something beige from a packet, was that the tunnels had partially collapsed in the firefight and the Rodden was a crawl through 40 meters of unstable passage, with an unknown number of Keldrath stragglers who hadn't received the memo about losing. He kept eating. I expanded, the passage required low-profile movement. 2 operatives maximum. The structural integrity was unpredictable. We had lost a drone at the 18-meter mark 3 days prior and had not sent another in because we suspected the Keldrath had repurposed it. He finished the packet. Folded it. Put it in his jacket pocket. Okay, he said. Okay, I repeated. When do we go? I looked at Vel looked at me. We had a brief silent conversation of the kind that long service officers develop, the kind that communicates, did you just hear what I heard, in under 2 seconds. You need to rest, I said. Your transport, I slept on the debris field. That's not, I stopped. You slept. On the debris field. 4 hours. Maybe 3 and a half. He shrugged. The shrug pulled something in his left side, I could see it in the fractional tightening around his eyes, and then, it was gone. I've run on less. I timestamped, 4 hours 33 minutes and 17 seconds. Human operational calculus appears to treat rest as negotiable. Flagged for medical review pending his agreement to medical review, which is not yet confirmed. He agreed to 6 hours. I timestamped every hour. At the 4-hour mark I checked the corridor outside his quarters because I'd heard movement and thought it was a Keldrath breach alert. It was Brennan, sitting on the floor against the wall with his jacket off, pressing something small and flat against his ribs. I stood there for approximately 3 seconds longer than was professional. "Commander," he said. He didn't look up. "You should be sleeping." "I am sleeping." "You're sitting on a corridor floor pressing a..." I looked at the object. "What is that?" "Heat compress." "Cracked rib." The silence that followed had weight. "You have a cracked rib," I said. "Couple of them." "From the transport?" "Yeah." He looked up then. His eyes were the color of something I don't have a comparison for, not dark, not light, just very settled, like they'd stopped being surprised by things some time ago. "It's fine. They're not displaced." "I don't know what that means." "Means they'll hold." He went back to the compress. "Go to sleep, Commander." I stood there for another moment. Then, I went to my quarters and timestamped 6 hours 2 minutes and 44 seconds. Human operative disclosed cracked ribs. Multiple. Classifies as fine. Continuing to monitor. Not sure what monitoring accomplishes. We went in at 1400 hours. The tunnel entrance was a meter-wide gap in the blown-out lower wall of the processing facility, which required us to enter on our stomachs. This is not a movement that Vetheri physiology handles with any grace. We are built wide and our auxiliary limbs, when folded, create pressure points that make extended prone movement uncomfortable in ways I am not going to put in the official report. Brennan went first. I watched him slide into the gap with the specific quality of motion that I can only describe as practiced. Not cautious. Not braced. Just accustomed. He moved through the darkness ahead of me and I followed, listening to my own breathing and the scrape of my limbs on rubble and the distant, irregular clicking that I had been told was structural settling and that I did not entirely believe was structural settling. 14 meters in, he stopped. I nearly ran my head into his boot. He held up a fist. I stopped. We stayed motionless for, I didn't check my timestamp until afterward, but it was 47 seconds. In complete stillness. In the dark. With the clicking somewhere ahead. Then, he moved forward again. "What was that?" I murmured. "Patrol rhythm," he said. "2 of them. Moving away." I had not heard a patrol rhythm. I had heard clicking. I timestamped 14 hours 23 minutes and 11 seconds. Human appears to process auditory data at different resolution than Vetheri standard. Logging for post-mission debrief. The relay was at 38 meters. Between us and the relay, at approximately 26 meters, was the repurposed drone. I knew it was repurposed because it was facing the wrong direction. Keldrath reprogramming is thorough isn't the right word. Territorial is closer. They don't just redirect a captured asset. They orient it to face back the way it came, as a kind of statement. We both saw it at the same moment. I started calculating retreat vectors. Brennan started watching it. "Movement pattern," he murmured. "It'll sweep left in approximately," I checked. 8 seconds. "How wide?" 40 degrees. He was quiet for 3 seconds. I watched him watch the drone. There was something happening in his face that I couldn't read, not calculation exactly, more like the expression of someone who has just been handed an inconvenient problem and is deciding whether to be annoyed or entertained by it. He reached into his kit and produced a fragment of debris from the tunnel collapse. Small. Flat. About the mass of a writing instrument. "When it sweeps," he said. "When it sweeps what?" He didn't answer. He waited for the sweep, and, in the half-second window when the drone sensor array was at maximum lateral extension, he slid the fragment across the ground, not at the drone, not toward the relay, but at the far wall, where it hit with a sound barely louder than the structural clicking. The drone recalibrated. Turned. Held. We moved. At 32 meters, the floor dropped 8 centimeters without warning, a fault in the rubble, and I caught myself with my auxiliary limbs, but not before the clatter of my adjustment filled the tunnel with what felt like an enormous noise. The drone began to turn. Brennan did something I don't have a precise Vethary equivalent for. He flattened himself against the tunnel wall with a speed that looked less like movement and more like disappearance there, and then, not there, pressed into a shadow with his legs bent at an angle that looked structurally inadvisable for a biped, and he stopped. Completely. Mid-breath. I mimicked him. Less elegantly. The drone completed its turn. Swept. Paused. I became extremely conscious of my ribs. My ribs, which were intact and uncracked, and which were still somehow the loudest things in the tunnel because my breathing was. Brennan's hand found my arm in the dark. Pressed once. Slow down. I slowed down. The drone settled back into its patrol rhythm. At 14 hours 41 minutes and 3 seconds we reached the relay. Extraction was the uglier half. The Keldrath stragglers, there were 3, not the estimated 1 to 2, had been waiting in the secondary tunnel running parallel to our route. They had, apparently, also heard the debris fragment hit the wall at 32 meters and had been moving toward it. We came out of the main tunnel into the intersection and I had approximately 1 second to process that the situation had changed before Brennan moved. I'm going to be precise here, because in my report I wrote the human operative engaged the hostiles, which is accurate but insufficient. What he did was absorb a strike to his left side, the already injured left side. I clocked the impact location and felt something I don't have a word for, and used the momentum of it to redirect himself into the second operative while I handled the first. The third operative went for the relay. Brennan let go of the relay. I had a moment of absolute confusion. The relay was the mission. He let go of it because his hands were busy and he'd made a calculation. I understand this now, at 4 o'clock the following morning, writing this report, that the relay wasn't going anywhere and the third operative was, and that the asymmetry of those two facts decided the matter. He was right. It took 11 seconds. At the end of 11 seconds the 3 Keldrath were subdued, the relay was in my hands, and Brennan was leaning against the tunnel wall with his right hand pressed against his left side. That rib, I said. Yep. The one that was already cracked. Might be a couple more now. He pushed off the wall. Let's move. I stood there for 1 more second than I should have. Let's move. As though the update on his structural integrity was a weather report. As though the appropriate response to "I have more broken bones than I arrived with" was forward momentum and a 2-word sentence. I timestamped, 14 hours 52 minutes and 38 seconds, mission complete. Relay secured. Human operative, status unknown, self-assessed as functional. I am choosing to believe him because the alternative is a philosophical crisis I don't have time for. We came out of the tunnel at 15:04. Vel was waiting. She looked at Brennan. She looked at the relay. She looked at me. How bad, she said. He says he's fine. She looked at Brennan again. Brennan was already studying the relay's casing with the focused attention of someone who had fully moved on from the last 45 minutes and was interested in the next thing. The secondary junction housing is damaged, he said. You'll need to replace it before it'll transmit. You need medical attention, I said. After. Before. He looked at me. That settled look again, like a person who has had this conversation with himself already and finished it some time ago. After, he said. Not confrontational. Just true. I opened my mouth. I closed my mouth. I timestamped, 15 hours 4 minutes and 55 seconds, have officially run out of arguments. Logging that the deficit is not tactical but philosophical. We'll revisit. What I didn't log, what I am logging now, at 4:17 the following morning, because apparently I have a problem with this particular timestamp, is what I thought in the moment between opening my mouth and closing it. It wasn't what is wrong with him. It was something quieter and considerably more unsettling. It was, he already knows what he costs himself and he already decided it was worth it, and he made that decision before he got on the transport, and there is nothing I can say that changes the math. That was when I started to understand that my question, why didn't you stop him, was never going to have a satisfying answer. Because stopping him would have required him to be a different kind of creature. And the mission required exactly the kind he was. At 1900 hours I began what I expected to be a 4-hour strategic debrief with my unit and the human operative. At 1904 I discovered that the relay we'd retrieved was not the problem. The problem was what was using it. Let me back up. The relay in the lower tunnels was a Vetheri communication hub, our technology, our encryption, ours. That was not in question. What Brennan noticed, while I was arguing with him about whether he needed medical attention before or after he touched the relay housing, was a secondary signal embedded in our own channel. Not broadcasting. Listening. He didn't announce this. He didn't make a speech about it. He said, "Who has access to your encryption keys on this post?" I said, "What?" He said, "How many people?" I named 7. He nodded, very slightly, and kept working on the housing, and I spent approximately 90 seconds thinking he was asking for post-mission procedural reasons before the implication arrived and sat on my chest like a structural collapse. Someone on Veth 9 had been feeding our channel to the Keldrath. The 3 stragglers in the tunnel hadn't been there by accident. I timestamped 15 hours 7 minutes and 3 seconds, compromised channel suspected. This post has a leak. Revising threat assessment. Revising everything, actually. The medical bay smelled like antiseptic and the particular hopelessness of recycled air. Brennan sat on the examination table while our field medic, a Vetheri named Oris, prodded his left side with the focused disapproval of a professional confronted with willful self-neglect. 3 cracked ribs, Oris said. 1 fractured. The fracture is hairline, but I know, Brennan said. You knew before I told you. I've had cracked ribs before. Oris looked at him the way you look at something that has walked into your medical bay carrying damage it has clearly learned to manage. Not horror. Something closer to professional respect seasoned with personal exasperation. I'm wrapping them, Oris said. I know. And you're going to tell me about the shoulder. A pause. What about the shoulder? The one you haven't moved since you came in here. Another pause. Longer. It's fine, Brennan said. Oris's expression didn't change. She moved to the shoulder. She pressed something specific and Brennan's jaw tightened exactly once, a motion so controlled it almost didn't happen. Partial dislocation, she said. It's been relocated. Roughly. It works. It works now. That's the relevant time frame. I was standing in the doorway. I had been standing in the doorway for 6 minutes. I had told myself I was there to discuss the channel compromise. I was, in fact, there because I did not know what to do with what I was watching and I seemed to need to keep watching it until I did. It works now. For words that described a philosophy of self-maintenance so alien to Vetheri operational doctrine that I had no framework for it. We do not fight through injury. We pull back, we treat, we return at capacity. The math of it is simple, a diminished operative is a liability, and liabilities compound. He was operating on different math. Not recklessness, I'd have recognized recklessness. This was something considered. He knew his damage. He had assessed what it cost him and what it still allowed him to do, and he had made a decision that the mission's need exceeded the cost, and he had continued. What disturbed me was how stable that decision looked from the inside. It looked like it didn't hurt him to make it. I timestamped 19 hours 11 minutes and 44 seconds AM questioning whether human pain tolerance is physiological or psychological. Currently leaning toward both. Neither answer is reassuring. The debrief started late because Brennan needed 20 minutes to eat something, which Oris enforced with the authority of a person who has decided that this is the hill she will die on. He ate. Beige packet again. Different flavor, if packets have flavors. He ate it with the same quality of attention he gave the relay housing, which is to say, complete, unhurried, and somehow conveying that food was information being processed. My unit arrayed themselves around the situation table. Vel, Oris. Two of my field officers, Keth and Sorry. The relay sat in the center like an accusation. Walk me through the signal, I said. Brennan walked us through it. He was not a communicator by nature, I say this without judgment, it is simply observable. He used the minimum words. He pointed. He referenced hardware components by the kind of casual shorthand that means I have known these parts longer than you've known me. Twice he stopped mid-explanation and started over, not because he was wrong but because he'd overestimated how much we knew, recalibrated, and began again from further back. The second time he did this, Vel exchanged a look with me. He noticed our gap, her expression said. And he adjusted without commenting on it. What he was telling us, in the minimum viable words, was this: the secondary signal had been active for 11 days. It had been transmitting not our communications, but our pattern. Movement patterns. Shift changes. Operational rhythms. It was not interested in what we said. It was interested in how we moved. That's why the tunnel, Sorry said. Yep. They weren't waiting. They knew our entry point. Yep. So whoever planted the tap knew we were going in. Brennan looked at her. Or knew you'd have to, eventually. The silence that followed was the kind that has a shape. One of the 7 people with access to our encryption keys had put a listening device on our relay and fed 11 days of behavioral data to the Keldreth. The 3 in the tunnel had not been stragglers. They had been a reception committee. For us. For the relay we had gone to retrieve. I timestamped, 19 hours 43 minutes and 2 seconds, the relay was bait. We walked into a prepared position. Adding, the relay being bait means the relay works, which means the mission was still a success, which does not make me feel better. How do you find them? Keth asked. He meant the informant. Brennan took a slow breath. I watched his ribcage manage it, watched the micro-adjustment he made to avoid the fracture, and said, you don't look for who did it. Then, what do you look for who could have done it and who benefits from not getting caught now? He paused. 7 people with key access. How many were on post 11 days ago? We checked. 5. How many knew about the tunnel mission before today? We checked. 3. How many, he said, have a reason to want the Keldreth to have this post back? The room went very quiet. The answer was, we didn't know. That was the problem. We didn't know enough about the personal geometry of our own unit to answer. Brennan did not look triumphant about this. He looked tired. Tired in the way of someone who has had to walk people through this particular logic before and found it no easier the second time. I'm not saying it's one of you, he said. I'm saying one of the 3 people who knew was worth watching. For the next 12 hours. Before you move the relay. Why 12 hours? Vel said. Because if they know we found the tap, they'll move. If they don't know, they'll wait to see what we do with the relay. He shrugged carefully, with his right shoulder only. You watch what they do with that gap. That's your answer. The next 12 hours were the longest I have logged since my 2nd year of service, when my unit was pinned in a canyon on Taith 7 for 3 days waiting for extraction. That had been a known, static danger. I had something to point my attention at. This was the other kind. The kind where the threat is in the same room as you and you don't know which face it's wearing. I timestamped every hour. On the hour. My unit started doing it too, unconsciously, checking their own timers, as though keeping precise track of minutes was a form of control over what happened in them. Brennan did not timestamp. Brennan actually slept, on a cot in the secondary bay, with the relay 2 rooms away and an informant somewhere in the building, and I found this aggressively unreasonable and, also, upon reflection, intelligent in a way I didn't want to examine. He was recovering. He was doing the math again. The next thing was coming and he was investing in his capacity for it. I sat in my office and watched the corridor feeds and did not sleep and told myself this was because someone had to. At 6:44, Sari came to my office. She stood in the doorway. Her hands were together in front of her, not folded, just touching, fingertips to fingertips. A Vethery gesture that means I have something difficult to say and I am building the architecture for it. Kath, she said. Just the name. I looked at the feed from the relay room. Kath was standing at the relay with his back to the corridor camera, doing something small and careful with his upper hands. I do not have a good account of the next 4 minutes. I have a timestamp, 6 hours 48 minutes and 15 seconds situation resolved, and I have the operational report, which is precise and affectless in the way that operational reports are required to be. What I do not have is a good translation of what it felt like to detain a field officer I had served beside for 14 months because a human I had known for 36 hours had drawn a box around the right 3 questions. Brennan was awake when it happened. I don't know whether Oris alerted him or whether he just knew, the way he'd known about the patrol rhythm in the tunnel. He was standing in the secondary bay doorway when we brought Keth through. He didn't say anything. Keth looked at him. Something passed between them in that look that I am not qualified to interpret. Not anger. Not contempt. Something more like acknowledgement. One person recognizing another person who knew the same kind of game. Then, Keth looked away. Brennan went back to the cot. I timestamped, 6 hours 52 minutes and 7 seconds. Operational note, human operative did not gloat. Adding this to the record because I'm not sure I wouldn't have. At 8 o'clock, with Kethan secured holding and the relay prepped for proper transmission and my unit running on too little sleep and the specific brittle energy of people who have discovered that the threat was inside and then removed it, I went to the secondary bay. Brennan was sitting up, jacket on, that compress against his ribs again. You're leaving, I said. Transport in 2 hours. I stood there. I had things I meant to say, operational things, debrief protocols, chain of custody procedures for the cat situation. I had a list. The questions, I said instead. Who does it benefit to stay hidden? You've used that before. Not a question. He looked at me. You always start there, he said. Everything else is noise until you answer that. And if the answer isn't clear? Then, you keep pulling on the noise until something tightens. I thought about the tunnel. The debris fragment. The specific, narrow window of the drone sweep. Keep pulling until something tightens. You could have told us who to watch, I said. From the start. When you first found the tap. Why the 12 hours? He was quiet for a moment. Because I didn't know, he said. I knew the shape of it. I didn't know the person. He adjusted the compress. And, because if I'm wrong, you remember I was wrong. That matters more than me being right. I didn't have anything to say to that. I timestamped, 8 hours 4 minutes and 33 seconds, human operative apparent philosophy, accuracy over credit. Logging because I'm not sure this is standard. What I didn't timestamp, what I am adding now, at the end of this section, because reports should contain the true thing and not just the procedural thing, is that I stood in the doorway of the secondary bay for slightly too long after that, and what I was thinking was not about Keth, or the relay, or the tap. I was thinking about the 12 questions I hadn't asked. And about someone who had asked 3, and gotten the right answer. He almost didn't make the transport. Not because of the ribs. Not because of the shoulder. Not for any of the reasons I had catalogued and monitored and quietly panicked about over the preceding 36 hours. He almost didn't make it because of a conversation in my office at 9 o'clock that went 17 minutes longer than it should have, and because I had something to ask him and no efficient way to ask it, and because I am recording this in a professional capacity and I stand by the characterization, genuinely bad at receiving a question he wasn't expecting. I will explain. At 9 o'clock, I called him to my office. Not for protocol. Not for the debrief, which was already filed. I told myself, while I waited, that it was a standard pre-departure check-in. Post-mission, joint operative, routine. Vetheri command structure has 6 forms for this. I had opened all 6 and closed all 6 and was sitting at my desk with nothing in front of me when he arrived. He looked at the empty desk. Then, at me. "You don't have paperwork," he said. I opened a form. "I have paperwork." He sat down across from me and I watched him find a position that accommodated his ribs and I tried to begin the form and could not and set it down again. "What happened to you?" I said. "Before." "The shoulder. The experience with cracked ribs. The math you run." He was quiet. "I'm not asking for your file," I said. "I'm asking you." Another pause. Longer. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of my unit running post-cath reconfiguration drills, the sounds of a post that had just pulled a bad tooth and needed to prove its remaining teeth were good. It was a sound I usually found reassuring. Right now it was just background. "It's not a story," he said finally. "I'm not asking for a story. I mean," he stopped. Looked at his hands. "There's no clean version. No event. It's just," he made a small, unfinished gesture with his right hand, the one whose shoulder worked. "It's just that it kept being useful." I didn't ask him to clarify. I understood what he meant. It kept being useful was not a story about how he learned to endure. It was a story about a process so gradual it had no beginning, just a series of moments where what he cost himself was less than what the mission required, and he had made that trade, and then made it again, and somewhere in the making it again the trade stopped feeling like a sacrifice and started feeling like a tool. He hadn't been built for it. He had just kept choosing it until the choosing was what he was. I timestamped 9 hours 6 minutes and 17 seconds updating assessment, not recklessness, not indifference. Something else. Working on terminology. "I want to ask you something," I said. "And I want you to answer it honestly." He looked at me. "When you went into the tunnel yesterday," I said, "you knew about the tap. You suspected a compromised position. You had cracked ribs and a partial shoulder dislocation from a transport crash you had not reported. And you went in first." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at me for a long moment. Not defensive. Not searching for the right answer. Just considering whether to give me the real one. "Because you had 7 people on this post," he said, "and one of them was going to watch whoever went into that tunnel to decide what to do next. And if it was one of yours, they know your people. They know their patterns. They know what caution looks like from them." He paused. "They didn't know me." The office was quiet. "So the point," I said, "wasn't the relay. The relay was the point. The tap was the second point. You used yourself as an unknown variable. I used myself as a thing they hadn't accounted for." He shrugged, carefully. "Somebody new walks into a prepared position, it tells you things. Where they hesitate. What they protect. How they communicate when something unexpected happens." He met my eyes. I came out with the relay and the shape of who was watching. That was the mission. I looked at him. In 31 years of service I have done many things that I describe in reports using language that makes them sound like decisions. Reading those reports afterward, I am frequently impressed by the strategic clarity of Commander Sereth 4, who apparently always knew what she was doing. I am less impressed in real time. "You didn't know it would be Keth," I said. "No. You knew it was one of 3. I knew it was one of 3 who had both the access and the position to benefit from ambiguity." He said it without apology. I was wrong about which one it was going to be twice before I was right. This landed in an interesting way. "You had other candidates." "Sorry, first. Then, Vel, briefly." He said their names without weight, like he was naming tunnel coordinates. Sorry was too obvious. I was wrong about Vel. That took me about 6 hours to revise. I thought about Vel in the tunnel doorway. Vel's expression when Keth was brought through. Vel in the debrief, her voice exactly level, her hands exactly still. She knew, I said. Vel knew you were watching her. She knew I was watching everybody. She didn't object. No. Something almost like appreciation moved across his face. She didn't. I timestamped, 9 hours 14 minutes and 55 seconds, Vel logged for commendation. Human's assessment confirmed by own observation. Also logging, was watched. Also did not object. Unsure what this says about me. He left at 10 o'clock. Transport was on time, which I note with the particular appreciation of someone who had last seen his mode of transport in a debris field. I walked him to the staging bay because there were procedures that required a commanding officer to accompany departing joint operatives, and also because I wanted to, and I am adult enough to admit that even in a professional document. Vel was there. She looked at Brennan. He looked at her. Good read, she said. Yours was better, he said. That was the whole exchange. I don't know what it meant and I'm not sure it required me to. Oris was also there, with the expression of someone who has just watched a patient survive something she would have preferred to prevent and was choosing to interpret this as a win. You need to have those ribs properly imaged, she said. I know. You won't. Probably not for a while. I'm noting it in the transfer file. That's a good idea. Oris made a sound that communicated she had more to say about this and had decided that medicine was medicine but futility was futility. Keth replacement, sorry, and 2 of my junior officers were in the staging bay running equipment checks. They looked at Brennan with the expression my unit now wears when looking at him, not reverence, nothing so clean as that. Something more complicated. The expression of people who spent 36 hours thinking they understood the threat picture and, then, discovered the picture had a third dimension they'd missed, and that the person who'd found it had done so while bleeding quietly in a tunnel. Brennan didn't notice them looking. He was checking his kit. Here is what I did not put in the official report. At 9:58, 2 minutes before the transport called for boarding, Brennan stopped at the staging bay entrance and turned back to me. I thought he'd forgotten something. I looked at his kit. You're going to have problems, he said. I looked up. The Keldrath knew you were going in because they had 11 days of pattern data, he said. That means they know your rotation schedules. They know when you're thin. They know how long your response lag is when the alert comes from the lower levels. He looked at me steadily. Keth was 1 tap. That's not usually how this works. I went still. How does it usually work? I said. 1 tap is reconnaissance. 2 taps is preparation. He paused. You found 1. And then he turned and went through the staging bay door and was gone. At 10:03, after the transport cleared the dock, I sat down at my desk and opened a new incident report. I sat with it for a long time. The relay was transmitting correctly. Keth was in secured holding. The tunnel was sealed. The mission was successful by every measure command would use to assess it. What I had, in addition to a successful mission, was the knowledge that someone, possibly more than one someone, had been planning a return to this post for 11 days, and that we had disrupted one piece of that plan, and that the disruption may have accelerated the others. What I had was a solved problem and an unsolved problem wearing the solved problem's face. Vel appeared in my doorway. He told you, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. He told me too. Last night. While you were sleeping. I looked at her. You didn't bring it to me. He asked me to wait. He wanted to see if you'd ask the right question first. She paused. In the office. The question about the shoulder. I thought about that. I thought about what the question about the shoulder had actually been, not a question about an injury, but an attempt to understand what kind of thing I had been working beside. Whether it would tell me the truth if I asked directly. He had been watching me while I was watching him. I timestamped 10 hours 7 minutes and 41 seconds have been outmaneuvered. Logging this without commentary because the commentary would be undignified. We need a sweep, I said. Full post. Every relay, every access terminal, every person with key rotation in the last 90 days. That's 23 people, Vel said. I know. Starting when? Now. She nodded. Started to go. Vel. She stopped. Why didn't he just tell me? I said. The second tap. Why the test? She thought about it. Because he needed to know if you'd ask. Why? Because if you wouldn't ask the uncomfortable question, she paused, choosing words carefully, then, telling you the answer wouldn't help. She left. I sat with the incident report for another 3 minutes. Then, I wrote the first line. This post has a second compromise. Possible. Unconfirmed. The following is what we know. At 4:17 the next morning, I know, the timestamp, I finished the report. I read it back. It is thorough. It is accurate. It describes, in the language of operational documentation, everything that occurred during 72 hours that command will classify as a tactical anomaly. What it does not describe, because there is no field for it, is the question I have been sitting with since 10:03. Not, was this worth what it cost him? That math is his, not mine, and he'd already done it. What I have been sitting with is the version he gave me of how it worked, the choosing, again and again, until the choosing was what you were, and whether that is something that is done to a person or chosen by one, and whether there is, in the end, a meaningful difference. I have 7 people on this post. One of them was Kef. I don't know who else there might be. And the only person who showed me how to find one of them boarded a transport at 10 o'clock and is currently somewhere between here and wherever they send him next, pressing a heat compress to his ribs, running math on the next thing. I timestamped 4 hours 17 minutes and 2 seconds, closing log. Status, compromised post, active sweep underway, relay functional, mission successful by all official metrics. Unofficial metric, I asked the right question once. I need to get better at knowing which question that is. 12 hours later, the sweep found a second tap. It had been there for 19 days.